driving this long forest road out into a location in the Olympic National Park called the Enchanted Valley. So this is about a 15-mile hike out, and usually in peak season it's really busy, but I think this time of year I'll see no one out there at all because it's just early spring. This trip I'm going to be doing a 4-day hike, and it'll be about 50 miles. The coolest part about the Enchanted Valley is that it is all old growth forest that follow this really neon blue river up into this valley. Then there's these massive hanging canyon walls that just have huge 100-foot waterfalls just cascading down. You can see snowy peaks, just these green, lush, old growth forests like you can see all around me right now. It's just such a cool spot. I'm gonna do a lot of landscape photography. I wanna get a lot of shooting done, and it should be a good adventure. Let's hit the trail. I have brought a brand new camera on this trip, Nikon Z30. So my other camera, the Z7, absolutely love it, great landscape camera, but even for how light it is, it weighs about 7.5 pounds. So I've been experimenting around with this Nikon Z30 with a smaller tripod. Although it's a crop sensor, the whole kit only weighs a little over 2 pounds. So it's great for really long distance backpacking trips. But I also noticed I pull it out to shoot a lot more just because it's so easy and it's so small. So I'm gonna be testing that on this trip, which is exciting. So there's a bear right back there looking at me. I'm pretty far away still, but I'm staying low so he doesn't see me. He's sniffing. See it right in there. Insane how big these are. So it might be hard to see with the wide angle lens, but it finally opened up where you can see the first snowy peaks up there. This area is just ridiculous. Got about 8.75 on the trail and just stopped to fill up some water. But I just spent the last 3 weeks down in the Escalante in Utah hiking in the canyons, and coming to this from being down in the desert is unreal because down there you really got to filter your water because the runoff is from, I don't know, could be 1,000 miles away, lots of cow pastures upstream. But here out in the Olympics, I've never filtered water in my life because this is coming right from the glacier that's, I don't know, 10 miles up that way, which we're headed. And hopefully we'll get up into that snowfield tomorrow so you guys can see the big mountains, Mount Anderson, which is up above. But it's looking pretty nice up there right now. We're got about 4 more miles on the trail right now, and then the goal is to make a fire tonight. And then once this light drops a little bit, you can see some clouds are starting to move in. Hopefully I'll get some good views of the peaks and some good forest photography too, because you can see in this area, there's just these huge old growth forests everywhere. Absolutely beautiful. So we just did the final push into the valley. About 13.5 miles, 2,500 feet of gain. Solid day out, but we're gonna head right back in here under these massive peaks. You can see they just start coming down here. Huge waterfalls just cascading down in all directions. And our camp's gonna be right back under there. And tomorrow, our aim is to get up through that pass right there and start headed up into the mountains and get a better look at that up from out of the trees. We'll see if we can do it or not. I've never tried it this time of year, but it looks like there's a path that we can get up in this like big snow field. And you might have good openings, all that, but man, these waterfalls are just absolutely ridiculous. Happy to be out here. When I'm hiking into camp, like within a half a mile of camp, I'm always eyeing spots, but maybe this could be a good one with that peak back there. I don't know. I don't know how far I can zoom in on it really. The one problem with this place is You lose the light early because of these huge canyon walls, but I might get some light back there on that peak. We'll see. This could also be a potential composition. Maybe even a vertical with these two peaks, then the water in the foreground. So that's something to keep my eye on. Clouded up, so I got lucky. I got some footage of it earlier. How's this look? Good fire pit, good waterfall views, fresh water. So I found another really good spot to shoot some more long exposures. See, I have this really nice water movement moving all the way back up through here. Perfect lighting right now. So you can see up there, there's clouds, but they're very thin, so the sun's getting this light box effects. You can really see this where it hits all the edges of things. It's not harsh, but there's definitely lighting, which gives you more depth in the scene. So here's the final edit of the photo that I'm about to teach you guys how I captured in the field. And a few things we're going to work on in the camera technique part of this video are how I use different shutter speeds and then mix them together or control them in the field. So you can see on the bottom of this photo, I used a much shorter shutter speed to show all this really nice detail of the water moving through. Why it's nice to use these shorter shutter speeds is because anything with detail is going to grab your eyes and pull it into the scene. So if you use it in the foreground, it can really grab your eyes and move it back into the part of the scene. You can see in the back of the scene, I use longer shutter speeds, and these can be good to move the eyes with leading lines. You can see they create these lines that go back up into the top of the scene, but there's not a whole lot of detail for your eyes to get stuck on. So remember, things that are very detailed become interesting, your eyes are drawn to them. Things that aren't as detailed can be used to move your eyes through the photo, but your eyes aren't going to stay on them as long because there's not as much detail to look at. So let's jump into the camera technique. So for this one, I have my camera set up like that. And when I'm looking at this, I'm just going to grab my circular polarizer here and I'm going to turn it this way until the color and light looks the best on the back of the screen. There's no right or wrong. So always remembering here, starting at base ISO for every shot. I have a setting on my camera. I just call this U1. And I have that across both of my Z7 and this Z30 that I'm out here shooting with on this backpacking trips because it's light. But it doesn't matter your camera. This same sequence or order of operations applies to every single shot you'll take for landscapes. So whenever I have this on U1, when I turn the camera on, it automatically goes to F11, ISO 100, and it automatically goes to aperture priority mode. And then I also have it set my exposure for exposure compensation right here to 0.00. So it starts me at the same place no matter what every single time, and then I can just adjust off of it from there. So the first thing I always do here is I'm going to grab my hyperfocal distance and focus on it. So for this, it's approximately this rock right here. So you can see this little rock right here, right there. I'm just going to zoom in on it, single point spot focus, back button focus, and then I just grab my focal ring and I turn it just slightly to make sure that back button actually nailed it. All right, perfect. Then I can hit OK here and zoom back out. Now the next thing I'm thinking about for this scene, I'm always asking myself, what's the minimum f-stop or depth of field I need for this scene? Well, if you look at this scene, pretty large depth of field here. You have something in the close foreground, right here, all the way to the distant background. So f8's just not going to cut it for this one. I might even need f16, but I'm always going to start at f11 first to see if it covers it. And if the focus falls off in the foreground, then I can move up to f16 to solve that problem. I'm never going to f16 until I test out the f11 because f16, although larger depth of field, due to lens diffraction, it's not going to be as sharp. f11, good. ISO 100, good baseline. I'm going to pull up my histogram here. And I'm going to push my histogram all the way to the right. So exposure compensation, the number on the EV does not matter. I just need my histogram exposed over to the right. Perfect. This kicks out a shutter speed over 1/1/6 of a second. So no matter what, I always recommend your first shot, just get a baseline shot so you can check focus and everything else. Don't worry about your shutter speed too much for these long exposure shots yet. But the last step of my sequence is always, does shutter speed matter for this shot? If it doesn't, you can just take the shot. But for long exposures, it's always going to matter. So those longer shutter speeds will be more diffuse, mistier looking water. The shorter shutter speeds will be choppier, much more detailed that'll grab your eyes more. Remember, things that are detailed and sharp grab your eyes. Things that are diffuse and misty looking aren't going to grab your eyes as much, but they can be used for leading lines back into the scene. So always asking yourself, does shutter speed matter for this shot? It does for this one, but I'm good with testing 1/1/6 of a second for the first shot. So I'm just going to put my exposure delay here on to dampen out any shake. And I'll take this first shot here. I'm going to check the focal point first. That rock looks sharp. Then I'm going to define the closest thing in the scene. This is going to happen for every single shot. It's that fern. So I'll check that fern out. That fern looks fairly sharp. Maybe it could get a little sharper. So keep that in mind. And then I'll check the furthest thing in the scene, which are these trees back here. And they're nice and sharp. So I'm good there. I like how this water looks. It's a mix between a long exposure and a shorter exposure at 1/1/6 of a second. So you have some detail, but it still has these really nice leading lines. So if you wanted to check your shutter speed, or if you wanted to check your focus down there in the foreground, you could go up to f16 here. If you were in doubt, take another shot, and then you could compare and contrast these two. So what I like to do is I'll take that shot, and then I'll zoom into the focal point. I want to always make sure that's sharp. So now that I've verified that that focal point is in focus, if that's out of focus, there's no point in checking anything else. So that's the f16 image. Keep that in mind. See how sharp it is? And then I can go to the f11 image. They both look about the same, which means that it doesn't matter which one I use, but I'm always going to pick the f11 because that's going to keep me sharper throughout the entire image, even if the f-stop and depth of field changes.
So let's take a look at both images that I just took. This first one you see is the f11, taken at 0.6 seconds, ISO 100 at 16 millimeters. And then we have the second one. This is the one that I took to see if it would be any sharper down here. Sometimes when you have that extended depth of field, it's worth leaving the focal point in place and seeing if it's any sharper. So you can see going up to f16 gives me 1.6 seconds. Remember, I'm always verifying and leaving it at that same focal point. So let's take a look at these. You can see on the f16 image, I do have some movement in the ferns down here, which kind of nullifies me getting any extra benefit out of it. But one thing we should look at is look at the closest thing in the scene and look at these ferns. This is the f16. Let's look at the f11 and see if it's much different. So look around the edges of this fern and this one. And what you'll actually notice is the depth of field is probably longer on the f16. It's probably larger. It's a guarantee it is because of physics. But since the shutter speed is longer, you're not actually getting it sharper down here. You can see where this one's not moving. The f11, the f16 are about the same sharpness. But the f11 one, which we're looking at now, does not have that movement. So that's why it's very good to look at these things when you're out shooting. As far as the back of the scene goes, this is the f16, and we'll zoom into the back of the scene with the f11. So if I compare and contrast these, looking at something that's not moving like these trees, I actually think the f11 is a bit sharper back there. So f16 is not always going to give you a sharper image. Then you could look around at some other places just to see what the sharpness is. This is the f11. Let's just look at this tree right here. Look at this tree right here. And you can see, you actually see some lens diffraction. When we're looking at this tree, I'll zoom in a little bit more so you can see it. So you'll notice that if we look at the f16 here, that the depth of field is slightly longer, but the really fine detail of the image is better on the f11 shot. Now this might be a mix between it being a shorter shutter speed. which I doubt it because my tripod wasn't moving at all. You would see any motion blur, but this is the actual lens diffraction showing up in the image. So f/16 is definitely not always better. Now, if you're just displaying this on a screen online, it's really not going to matter. So don't pixel peep too much and get too worried about it. The main things that you would see a difference in is the movement of a fern down here. So when we're zoomed out this far, such as you would view online, you're probably not going to notice that this fern is slightly moving in the f/16. And then everything else is all going to depend on the shutter speed you like. So for this specific shot, you could mix them both together. That's why it's nice having both. Or you could just use one. I'm just bouncing back and forth and looking here. I'd say I like the f/11 one more. I really like how all these fine details show up in the water, especially down in here. And you can really bring these out even more using some tips in photo editing.
That means I'm gonna go back to f/11 here. It's always good to talk through this stuff with yourself. So that was the first shot, the f/11 shot right there. And I can look at the water here. Now, everything else about this shot is going to be working on the different exposures. So remember, I'm going to start at the bottom and I'm going to work my way up through the image. Anywhere that has a different exposure, a different shutter speed that I need, that's where I'm going to concentrate on it. Remember, you do not want to change your focal point. You want to keep it in exactly the same spot. So if I'm looking down here and I want to test out a faster shutter speed down here, I could just grab my ISO and increase my ISO up a little bit. We'll go with ISO 250 here. I'll capture another shot. And then I'll go one at ISO 400. I like to take multiple of these at different shutter speeds, and the reason for that is twofold. Number one, sometimes what looks best on the back of your camera isn't what looks best when you get back home on the computer. So if you're shooting a specific composition with multiple exposures like this, take many of them. The other thing is, if it's raining, especially if you're shooting in water, a lot of times mist and water kicks up. If you take multiple exposures and you keep wiping your lens off and checking your lens, when you get home, you might find one of those exposures has water on it and it's hard to remove even with the clone stamp tool. Then you have these multiple array of backup exposures you can blend together for that one. So it's kind of a fail-safe. So now we have these. See, the shutter speed looks different there. I like how those look. And then you can start moving back up into the scene and say, okay, let's review these. Do I want to change what the shutter speed looks like back here at all? Maybe I'll test it out with a really long shutter speed for back in this area, just as an experiment. So these are all just experiments, but you should be walking yourself into it. So to go longer on shutter speed, I'm just going to take my ISO back down to base. And let's take the f-stop up to f/18. It's not a big deal because I'm only going to use it for that little part back there. That gives me 1.6 seconds. So you can see by always getting this first baseline image down, I know I have one shot in the bag to work off of. And then I can work from the front to the back of the image, piecing together any little shutter speed changes that I like. Then when I get home, I can compare and contrast, and I'll have lots of different options I can work with.
So let's take a look at some of the other images that I captured. So remember, these were the first two that I just talked through. Then the third one, I went up to ISO 200 at f/11, which gives me 0.4 seconds. And remember, I'm always just starting at the bottom of the composition and asking myself, what shutter speeds do I want to try for this specific part of the composition? And then I'll just work my way back through the composition. So you can try as many experiments as you want. Just remember that you're starting at the front and working to the back. And why I like to do this so much is because when you're editing, you'll always remember you have your base images first. Remember, I had decided I didn't even need this f/16 one because the plants were moving, so you could delete that one. So I have my base image right here. And then I have my experimental images asking myself, does shutter speed matter? And of course I'm going to say yes. This is from my camera technique shooting checklist. And when I say yes, I say, well, what part of the composition do I want to concentrate on? Well, I'm going to concentrate on here. So let's see what it looks like with a faster 0.4 second shutter speed. So you can see all this really nice movement. And just to show you how much different detail is in there, I don't use texture and clarity inside Lightroom to do this, but you could see how much detail you can bring out in these specific areas of water. And you could just mask this in. So we have 0.4 seconds, f11, ISO 200. Then we went up to ISO 400, which gives us 1/6 seconds, 1/6 of a second. So you can compare that to this. You'll notice even more detail in this water, just to show you guys what's in there. Look how much detail can be pulled out of this water. Really nice looking. And then you have the smoother variation. This is at 1.6 seconds. So I went up to f18 and I said, well, maybe I'd like that for the back of the photo here because it's so smooth. It can bring my eyes down into this area. Usually things that are close are going to have a lot of detail in them. And as things move back further into the scene, it's going to be hard to see intricate detail back here as much because it's very small, right? So a lot of times I'll use these smoother shutter speeds, 1.6 seconds at f18, to bring the eyes down into the interesting or closer part of the photo that's going to have more detail. So these are all good things to test out. I really like how this f18 looks back here. So I would just mask it into this small area. And then for the bottom part, I would just mask in the detail for the parts that I like right here. But this is how to think through these. Base file, after you have a good base file captured and you're sure you like it, it's sharp at the focal point, sharp at the foreground, sharp at the background, and then looking around the scene for anything that might be moving and making sure it's sharp there as well. Then you starting at the bottom of the composition and saying, how do I want to control the shutter speed in the bottom? And then slowly moving up the composition and adding different variations for anything you'd like.
So this is the shot for f18, and that's going to give me really silky water in the background. So now I have all these shots. After I do that, I always am going to put my finger in front of the lens so I can see it and take a shot of that. Get in the habit of doing this, and then all these batches of specific compositions where you have multiple exposures, you'll have a finger before and after them, and then when you go through to organize them all in Lightroom, then it's very easy to delete the finger shots and group these as part of the same images, and then you can easily start experimenting with them and editing them. So I just got my tarp set up. This thing's huge. It's at 8.5 by 10. So it takes a pretty big area compared to my other tent, which is a 2-man tent, but the footprint's pretty small, so I've just been getting used to setting this thing up. But in rain or any other harsh conditions, the size of this thing is huge. So you could easily camp out some really stormy and rainy conditions, which is nice for what I do because the best landscape photography comes from when weather's rolling through and then it leaves. So you'll have like undulating weather patterns of low pressure to high pressure, and a lot of times I'll just get stuck in a storm for maybe like a day or two, but this gives me tons of room to sit up, have everything aired out. And the other nice part is it's Dyneema, completely waterproof, so it's only 10 ounces. And then it's really easy to take up and tear down. But go over here, have some dinner. See irons over there making dinner, and then I think we're gonna start a fire right here. But awesome views. Got skunked on that peak back there because when I was coming up the valley earlier, under where all those peaks are, this was all opened up and that peak was just massive right there. Now it's completely gone. So might just be hanging out tonight by the fire, resting up and seeing what we can get tomorrow morning. I don't know if sunrise will be any good or not, but that's one thing about these landscape photography trips. You guys can watch my composition video. I talk about heck yeah compositions. If there's not a heck yeah composition, I mean, if it's not screaming at me, you have to take this or you're gonna regret it your whole life, then I just don't shoot at all. So a lot of the landscape photography game is just hanging out and waiting, and then you get those moments where you're just like, oh my gosh, and it's all worth it. And that's why I like this game so much. So I'm gonna head down there with Iron, check out these waterfalls, and get some dinner cooking, and then start the fire up.